Good day to all. We will now be discussing Module 3 of the Weighted Average Cost of Capital or WACC. So this will cover the cost of new common stock. This is actually the continuation of our Part 2 or Module 2 on the cost of equity, the retained earnings breakpoint, and the debt breakpoint. Next is on the cost of new common stock, or the variable that we will be using is the R sub E. The cost of internal equity or cost of retained earnings, we use RS, R sub S. So I want to mention this specifically or distinguish, gusto ko linawin. R sub E is the cost of equity kasi ginagamit ko rin yung RE. RE is retained earnings ha. Ayan. So RE retained earnings yon. So cost of RE. But R sub E, that's the cost of new common stock. So again, the main difference between the two, both are costs of equity, but the main difference is the flotation cost. Again, we've mentioned in the guest topic that these are the costs of issuing new shares or new capital. Underwriting, that's the one that we pay for our middleman, investment banker. Then there are legal and accounting matters to be dealt with. So there are costs related to that. There may be also registration fees or government fees, admin fees such as printing your certificates. So these are the costs to issue new stocks. Okay? The logic is the same with the commission for agents. So remember, WACC is related with financing. So we need to raise money. However, the money that we'll be receiving will be reduced by the cost that we incur in raising that money. Same goes when you sell. If you sell directly to your customer, your proceeds will be your collection will be the sales price. But if you have agents, so your collection or your net amount that you'll be receiving is the sales price minus the commission expense for the agents. Okay. Same goes for this one. If you raise money, you'll be receiving the proceeds, the stock price times the number of shares. But if you have rotation cost, so that will reduce your total proceeds, so that you'll be receiving the net proceeds that you can use for investing. So for the cost of new common stock, we'll be using the DDM because among the three models, the APM, DDM, the bond yield plus risk premium, you can apply the flotation cost because there's a stock price in DDM wherein you can reduce the you can apply the flotation cost. Our formula is using the constant growth model. So the cost of equity or cost of retained earnings is D1 over stock price plus growth rate. We just include there the flotation cost. If it is an amount, you deduct the flotation cost per share from the stock price in the denominator. Or if it is in percentage, you just multiply the stock price by the 1 minus the flotation cost percentage, or the percentage net of the flotation cost. Cost of bank loan, just an analogy. Basically, the cost of new equity in which we apply the DDM is similar with the basic concept of cost of bank loan. When you say cost of bank loan, we can refer to the interest rate. How do you get the interest rate for a simple interest? Okay, the basic formula is the numerator is your expense, the denominator is your net proceeds. For simple interest, your expense is the interest expense divided by what's your proceeds or proceeds, the principal, the amount. If you have an interest expense of 10 pesos, you have a principal of 100, then the interest rate is 10%. However, in a discounted loan, what is your interest rate? Again, we apply the formula of expense over the net proceeds. So in a discounted note, what if your discount is 10%? So your interest expense is 10 pesos. Your proceeds will be 100 pesos. You deduct the 10%, that will be 90. So your interest rate will be 10 divided by 90, 11.11%. So the way of computing for the interest rate or cost of bank loan is the same in computing for the cost of new equity. Okay. Next is a sample illustration. So we're given D1, expected dividend is 5 pesos, the stock price is 100, growth rate of dividend is 10%, and the flotation cost is 8%. If silent, it's 8% of the stock price. So questions: A, what is the cost of retained earnings? R sub S, cost of internal equity. B is cost of new common stock, R sub E. So applying the DDM method, for letter A, it's 5 pesos divided by 100 plus 10% is 15%. For letter B, the R sub B, cost of new common stock, is 5 pesos divided by the quantity 100 times 1 minus 15% or 0.85 plus 10%, you get 15.43%. Remember this concept, as you can see here, that generally the cost of new common stock is higher than the cost of retained earnings, or cost of external equity is higher than the cost of retained earnings, or cost of internal equity. True enough, because when you issue new common stock, you have additional costs or flotation costs. Definitely, in the cost percentage or cost of equity, new common stock and retained earnings, the cost of new common stock will be higher because of this flotation cost. Okay, next, I think this is one of the most important slides, if not the most important. Conclusion. So what are the relevant concepts to be learned for the cost of new common stock? First, we go to the basic principle. How do we determine the cost of capital, or what's the starting point? We refer to, as the basis, the required return by the investors. So for equity, what's the cost of equity? It is the return required by the shareholders. If shareholders require a higher return, then the cost of equity will be high. If shareholders require a lower return, then the cost of equity will be low. So if investors require a 10% return, your cost of equity is 10%. If you use retained earnings, then that will be your answer. What if we use new common stock? The answer will be the same, it's 10% also. However, since if you issue new common stocks, generally you incur flotation costs, so you need to adjust that flotation cost in the 10%. And generally, the effect of the flotation cost on the 10% is that it will increase. It will increase, as shown by the formula using DDM. That is why a general conclusion is that retained earning cost of new common stock, or R sub E, is generally greater than the cost of retained earnings, R sub S, unless there are no flotation costs. If there are no flotation costs, then these two costs will be the same. So the difference is the flotation costs. Okay, another important concept. Generally, we can compute for the cost of new common stock using the DDM or the DCF model, because there's a stock price. You can adjust the flotation cost on the stock price. However, what if the question is, what is the R sub E, or cost of new common stock, using CAPM? Can you answer that directly? The answer is no. But can you answer that indirectly? Yes. So how do you compute? So first, you can get the cost of new common stock, R sub E, and the cost of retained earnings, R sub S, using DDM. You get the difference, and then you add that difference to the cost of retained earnings, or R sub S, that you'll be computing using CAPM. By doing so, by adding the difference using the DDM in the cost of equity or cost of retained earnings using CAPM, you can get the cost of new common stock using CAPM. Okay? Some more problems based on the book, 10-4, page 360. Okay, pause this for a while. You go to the problem, you read, you answer, then you resume and look at the solution. Done. So for 10-4, you're given that the stock price is 30 pesos. Annual dividend is 3 pesos at year end, so that's T1, and the growth rate is 5%. So what is the company's cost of common equity if you use retained earnings? So R sub S, cost of internal equity. So the solution, 3 pesos divided by 30 plus 5%, you get 15%. For letter B, what if the flotation cost is 10%? What is the cost of new common stock? You just apply the flotation cost to the stock price, so it will be reduced. So 3 pesos over the quantity 30 pesos times the quantity 1 minus 10% or 0.9 plus 5%, you get 16.11%. Okay, next, some more problems. Okay, so problem 10-7, page 360. So pause this for a while, read the problem, solve, get the answer, then resume. Done. Okay. For 10-7, so you're given the expected dividend of 3.18, growth rate is 6%, stock price is currently selling at 36. Then, the new thing about this one is that you're given the net price per share of 32.4. First question, what's the cost of retained earnings? So solution, 3.18 divided by 36 plus 6%, 14.83. The next question is the flotation cost percentage. Generally, the flotation cost is represented as a percentage of your stock price. So you get the flotation cost, the amount, you get the stock price minus the net proceeds per share, 36 minus 3.4, I think that will be 3.6 divided by 36 divided, so you get 10%. And then lastly, basic formula for the R sub E, or cost of new common stock, 3.18 divided by the net proceeds of 32.4 plus 6%, you get 15.81%. Next problem, problem 10-13, page 361. So let's pause, then you answer, then you go back to this one. Okay, done. The good thing about 10-13, the slight difference is that you're given the constant growth rate, you have the stock price of 46.75, you're given a dividend yield of 5%, there's a long run payout ratio of 25%, ROE of 16%, the flotation cost is 5%. So how do you solve for this one? Again, you need to get first the variables for the cost of new common stock using DDM. However, the expected dividend is not given. But since the stock price is given and the dividend yield is given, you can work back the dividends. So solution, so dividend yield of 5% is equal to D1, the expected dividend, over 46.75. Computing for D1, you get 2.3375. And then you're now complete. The variables are complete. So to get the cost of new common stock, it's 2.3375 divided by 46.75 times 1 minus 5% or 0.95. Then plus 12%, you get 17.26%. Just a follow-up question. What if the growth rate of dividend of 12% is not given? How will you solve for this one? Or can this be solved? The answer is yes. One of the methods of computing for the growth rate is to get the product of the flowback ratio and the ROE. So to get the 12%, even if it's not given, you get the flowback ratio, which is 1 minus the payout ratio of 25%. The flowback ratio is 75% times 16%. ROE, you can still get 12%. Okay? Next is on the retained earnings breakpoint. Before we go further to this retained earnings breakpoint, I would just like to emphasize that in this important concept, remember the optimal capital structure. I think that's part 1. It is the structure that maximizes the stock price and shareholder value, minimizes the WACC. It's the percentage. Every time that we need to raise money for certain projects, we always follow the capital structure. For example, if it's 60% debt, 40% equity, we need to raise 1 million. So 60%, 600,000 is equity, 400,000 is debt. If we need to raise 10 million, we again follow the 60-40, the optimal capital structure. So it's 6 million equity, it's 4 million debt. Why? Because this structure, this combination will give us the highest price, the highest shareholder value, and the least WACC. Okay? So, as an analogy for the retained earnings, the concept of retained earnings breakpoint, for example, you got a certain score in a quiz or in your grade. You got a grade of this, for example, 80 out of 100. How do you know if it is okay or not? So you need a threshold. So in our case, our threshold is 65. So that's the passing. If you got 80, you have a good grade. But if you only got 65, you just passed. So pwede na, pero syempre, delikado. But if you get a grade of 64 or below, meaning you didn't pass. So you need a threshold, in your case, the passing of 65, to determine if our grade is okay or not. That's the concept of retained earnings breakpoint. The retained earnings breakpoint is the threshold. This is the amount that will tell us whether we'll be getting a higher WACC or a lower WACC for certain project. Why higher or lower WACC? Actually, nagbabago lang naman yung WACC natin do sa cost of equity. Pwede siya magmas mahal kapag nag-issue ka ng bagong common stock o kaya pag retained earnings ang ginamit mo, pababa. What's the determining factor for the higher cost? It's the flotation cost. So for example, the amount that you need to raise is for certain project because it's that's the cost is 8 million. Okay? How do you know if the 8 million will result to a higher WACC or lower WACC? Because you will be using new common stock or retained earnings. We need a threshold. The threshold is a retained earnings breakpoint. For example, if the retained earnings breakpoint is 5 million, you need 8 million. It means that you exceed or you have exceeded the 5 million. Because of that, you will have a higher WACC because you will use new common stock. But if the amount needed for a certain project is only 5 million, your RE breakpoint is 5 million, you're within the threshold. So meaning, you'll have a lower WACC because for the equity portion, you only need to use the retained earnings. Okay? So that's the application of retained earnings. But what's the basic definition of retained earnings breakpoint? Meaning retained earnings breakpoint. It is the amount of total capital that can be raised before issuing new common stock. So if I will show you in the next slide the computation. But what if we have computed for the retained earnings breakpoint at 5 million? So that's the amount that you can raise before issuing new common stock. Okay? And then there's a certain project that costs 5 million. So meaning you have enough retained earnings. Oh shucks. Okay, next for the illustration of retained earnings breakpoint. So you have this problem. So given that the capital structure is 60% equity, 40% debt, and your addition to RE or your basically that's your net income for the year or available RE that can be used is 300,000. What is the retained earnings breakpoint for the total amount of capital that can be used before you issue new common stock? We just divide the 300,000 available RE with the 60% percentage of common stock, you get 500,000. So how do you interpret this one? Okay, so it means that the 500,000 is your threshold. If you need a project that costs 1 million, for example, you need to raise 1 million, you need to issue new common stock for that, for the equity portion. Your RE is not sufficient for retained earnings. But if you have a project which costs only 500,000 or below, meaning the need not issue retain new common stock for that, your RE is sufficient. But please take note this, that the retained earnings breakpoint does not pertain to the total amount of retained earnings that you need to issue before or that you that is available before you issue your common stock. The retained earnings breakpoint is the total amount of capital. When you say total amount, it is the total amount of debt and total amount of equity that you can use or raise before you issue your common stock. In our case, so the total the retained earnings breakpoint is the 500,000, which consists of the 200,000 debt and 300,000 equity, and not only the 300,000 amount. So if we look at this further, the breakpoint is 500,000. 200,000 of that should be in the form of debt. 300,000 should be in the form of equity. Since we have an available retained earnings of 300,000, so it's sufficient. We need not to issue new common stock. Okay, now let's try to apply the retained earnings breakpoint that we have computed in the previous slide. So our RE breakpoint is 500,000. Given that our available RE is 300,000 divided by 60%, get 500,000. So how do we use RE breakpoint? So we use RE breakpoint as a threshold to determine if projects will have higher WACC or lower WACC, meaning will we use a higher cost of equity because of new common stock or lower cost of equity because we use retained earnings. So we have different projects with different amounts or cost. What if the project costs 500,000? Okay, so how do we use RE breakpoint? So if we compare, it's the same. So it means that the 500,000 capital or capital budget is within our RE breakpoint of 500,000. So no need to issue new common stock. How do we check this? So if we try to compute, 500,000 is the amount of capital needed for a certain project times the equity percentage. We follow the optimal capital structure of 60%. You get 300,000 minus our available, or comparing it to our available written earnings of 300,000, then we get 0, meaning the RE is sufficient for the 300,000 equity financing needed for the 500,000 capital. Now, what if the capital budget is 600,000? Since it's more than the 500,000 breakpoint, meaning for this project, we need to issue new common stock. But question, how do we compute, or how do we prove that there is a need to issue new common stock? So, if our capital is 600,000 and the equity portion is 60%, so we need 60% times 600,000, 360,000 for the equity portion. Okay? Since our available retained earnings is 300, meaning we have a short of 60,000 pesos for the equity financing. So that's the portion in which we need to issue new common stock. Okay. What now if our capital or the capital budget or the project costs 300,000? So comparing it to our threshold of RE breakpoint of 500,000, so it's much lower. So meaning we did not issue new common stock for the project which costs 300,000 because RE is sufficient. Actually, it's more than sufficient. So how do you compute for that? So to support. So if the amount of capital is 300,000, then the equity portion of that is 300 times 60%, it's 180,000. We compare it, or we minus the 300,000 available RE, we have a 120,000 negative. That negative means we have 120,000 excess retained earnings that may be available for other projects. Okay? In the end, again, just to recap, RE breakpoint or the retained earnings breakpoint is the threshold. For projects more than the RE breakpoint, we need to issue new common stock. Our cost of equity, hence our WACC will be higher. But projects within the RE breakpoint, we did not issue new common stock. The retained earnings is sufficient for the equity portion of the capital. We will incur a lower cost of equity, hence lower WACC. Okay, next, for this slide, so we'll be answering some exercises for retained earnings breakpoint. Actually, it's a theory. So, theory 10-5, page 359. So, you pause this for a while, you read the question, try to answer, then compare it to the suggested answer. Done? Okay. So, these are the suggested answers. For 10-5, you're given the WACC as the cost of debt, preferred stock, common equity. There's in this item there are 3 questions, so we subdivided to three questions or 3 answers, A, B, and C. First question is, will the WACC be different if the equity for the coming year came solely in the form of retained earnings versus some equity from the sale of new common stock? Actually, you can answer this one. The answer is definitely yes, because new common stock will give you a higher cost as compared to retained earnings. So using new common stock will give you a higher cost of equity, higher WACC. Okay. Next question actually is the application of the retained earnings breakpoint. The question is, will the calculated WACC depend in any way on the size of the capital budget? Definitely yes. Okay. By computing for the retained earnings breakpoint or the threshold, you can determine if a given size of capital will give you will necessitate new common stock, meaning you have a higher cost of equity, or you just need to use retained earnings, which will give you a lower cost of equity. That's the good thing about the retained earnings breakpoint. So if the capital budget is large enough and it will exceed the retained earnings breakpoint, like in our example previously, the retained earnings breakpoint is 68 million, and if our the amount needed is 100 million, so 100 exceeds the breakpoint of 68 million, you need to issue new common stock. But if your the capital needed is only 50 million, lower than the 68 million breakpoint, then you only need to use common stock, rather retained earnings, meaning a lower cost of equity. The good thing about using the retained earnings breakpoint as compared to the one that I've discussed in MCC, the last peso, first peso WACC. Kasi nung sa MCC natin, so sa module 4, sa classroom discussion, inassume lang natin kasi last peso, malamang dulo na yan yung common stock. First peso, una pa lang, malamang retained earnings. So we just assume the obvious. But in this one, it's exact. You have a figure. You can compute for the breakpoint. So kung may amount of capital ka na given, malalaman mo specific kung lalagpas ka o kung kailangan mo ng new common stock kasi lagpas ka sa breakpoint, o kaya retained earnings lang ang kailangan mo kasi below ka the breakpoint. Okay? And next for this one is just a continuation of 10-5 theory. The last question, will the dividend policy affect the WACC? Definitely. Again, in relation to RE breakpoint, if you have high dividends, meaning you have lower retained earnings available for investment purposes, a lower retained earnings will give you a lower RE breakpoint. If you have a lower RE breakpoint, there's a higher possibility that you'll be issuing new common stock. Kasi maliit yung breakpoint mo, ang laki lang ng capital, lalagpas ng breakpoint, you need to issue new common stock. This will give you a higher cost of equity, hence a higher WACC. Okay? Next is on the debt breakpoint. So this will be our last topic for module 3. So it's quite similar with the concept of retained earnings breakpoint, but RE breakpoint applies to equity, while debt breakpoint applies to the debt portion of our capital. So definition, it's the total amount of capital that can be raised before issuing a higher interest rate of debt. So the premise here is that we have various sources of debt financing. So at first you have the lower cost, next is the middle cost, and higher cost or higher interest rate debt. So the point is, at what amount of capital can we borrow money at a lower interest rate, or at what amount of capital we need to issue or borrow at a higher interest rate. Okay? So the formula is the amount of debt at a certain or at a lower interest rate divided by the debt portion of our capital structure or percentage of debt. So sample illustration. So given that the capital structure calls for 60% common stock, 40% debt, and you have two sources of debt available. The first million is at 6% lower, and then the next 2 million is at 8%. So in this case, what is our debt breakpoint? To compute, so it's 1 million, the amount at a lower interest rate of 6% divided by 40%, the percentage of debt in the capital structure, it's 2.5 million. So what is the interpretation? How do we use this one? So meaning if we need to raise a capital exceeding 2.5 million, so we'll incur a higher interest rate debt. So in addition to the 6% debt, we need to borrow at 8% also. But if the capital only calls for 2.5 million and below, meaning the debt portion of our capital structure, we will only incur a lower interest rate of 6%. Using the same example as with the retained earnings breakpoint, assuming that there is a certain amount of a project that costs 5 million, so we need to raise 5 million. So that's exceeding the 2.5 million debt breakpoint. It means that we will need to use the 6% interest rate debt and the 8% interest rate debt. But how do we prove that? So we need to compute. It's 5 million times 40% of the percentage of debt, which is 2 million. The available debt at 6% is 1 million. So meaning there is we need to cover another million coming from the 8%. But if the amount of capital needed for a certain project is just 2.5 million times 40%, so meaning the amount of debt that we need is only 1 million, and the available debt at 6% is 1 million, so it's sufficient. So we'll have a lower cost, meaning lower interest rate pertaining to the debt if our capital for the project is just 2.5 million as compared if it's 5 million.